I was washing my coffee mug at the sink when I saw the cardboard box in the alley. It was the kind of box that knows things: soft corners, greasy tape, a gap at the top like a mouth that wants to talk. I live behind a row of small shops in East Austin, and our alley collects the usual: bottle caps, cicada shells, a single rollerblade that has waited for its partner longer than some marriages. But this box felt different. Inside there were small broken items: a desk fan with a missing blade cap, a radio with a dusty dial, a backpack zipper that had given up on life. I nudged the box with my shoe, and something chimed like a bell struck under a blanket. It made me think of my grandfather in New Jersey, who could fix a toaster with a butter knife and patience. That afternoon I wrote 3 words on a piece of poster board: tiny repairs, free. I set up a card table in front of my apartment, a few yards from the taqueria, where people line up for breakfast tacos and opinions about the weather. I didn't have a plan. I had a screwdriver set, a coil of twine, and a roll of blue painter's tape that always makes me feel like I know what I'm doing. The first person to stop was a middle school kid with a cracked skateboard. He hovered like a bird that wasn't sure the feeder was safe. "I can take a look," I said, and the kid handed me the board like it was a passport. The front truck was loose, and the bushings looked like chewed gum. I tightened the bolts, added a thin washer I had in a jar, and the rattle disappeared. The kid rolled away, turned back, and did a tiny kickflip, the kind that says I am both shy and brave. He didn't say thanks with words. He just lifted his chin, which is a pretty good word if you think about it. News travels fast on our block, mostly by smell. The coffee shop pulls folks in with cinnamon. The bike place leaks chain oil and pride. My table attracted the curious and the hopeful. A woman from the flower shop brought me a pair of scissors with a screw that would not stay put. I tightened it and wrapped the threads with a shred of dental floss. "You're like a walking YouTube video," she said. I told her I was more like a paused video with the ad still playing. She laughed and put a daisy behind my ear. For the next hour, I wore that daisy and felt like a quiet parade float. Some things I couldn't fix. A man arrived with an electric kettle that had a black scar on the bottom. When I pressed the switch, the kettle made a sound like a bored bee and then went silent. I opened it, saw the fried board, and shook my head. The man sighed. "She died making oatmeal," he said. I offered my condolences like a small plate of fruit. He told me he'd moved from El Paso last month, and this kettle had seen him through a lot of long days. I said sometimes the best repair is replacement, and he laughed at the bitter truth of it. While I was working on a radio, I heard the cast iron sizzle of tortillas and felt the heat of the late morning sun lift off the asphalt like it was trying to become a balloon. A retired music teacher stopped by with a cassette player wrapped in a bandana. He said he still recorded his ideas on tape because the hiss reminded him of rain on a car roof. The player wouldn't eject. I popped the back off, found a loose spring, and felt the nervous tingle of maybe. It clicked into place, and when I pressed eject, the door opened with a soft sigh, like a patient finally taking a deep breath. The teacher's face lit up in a way that woke something old and warm in me. He took the bandana and polished a spot on the player as if it were a medal. By noon, my table looked like a nest. There were screws arranged on strips of blue tape, a roll of duct tape shaped like a gray donut, a little dish of washers that could have been cereal for a robot mouse. I was careful with everything because people hand you their small troubles with trust wrapped around them. A man who worked kitchen prep at the taco place brought me his wristwatch. The band pin had bent. I used the tiniest screwdriver I own, the one that makes my thumb look clumsy, and slid a new pin in place. He pressed the watch to his ear. The watches don't really tick anymore, and told me his daughter had learned to ride a bike yesterday by the elementary school. He mimed the little wobble of her first long ride. I realized I was collecting not just broken things, but stories, each one light enough to carry yet heavy enough to matter. I kept noticing the box in the alley. It felt like it had plans for me. After the lunch rush, I tugged it closer and dug deeper. At the very bottom, under a tangle of old charger cords that smelled like attic air, I found a small, hand-lettered tag. It said, "Community shop, do not throw away." My neighborhood used to have a place like that, a tiny repair shop run by a quiet man named Mr. Alvarez, who wore a red cap and a gentle smile. He closed 3 years ago when the rent doubled. I remembered the way he used to pat the counter while he listened to you explain the problem, the rhythm of kindness. I set the tag on my table next to the daisy and felt like I'd just found a map folded inside a book. I didn't say it out loud, but I think the day did. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. By the time the sun slid behind the barber's shop, the heat had dropped from fierce to friendly. The alley smelled like laundry and cilantro. I took a sip of warm water and reached for the next item, a portable fan with a cracked guard. The owner was a barista named Jess who always wore a vintage baseball cap with a team I didn't know. "It's my nap fan," she said. "I can sleep without the noise, but I prefer not to." I wrapped the crack with clear tape and added a thin lattice of twine, crossing it like a tiny rope bridge. It held. Jess tested the switch and smiled at the soft hum. "You're saving naps," she said, and left a muffin on the edge of the table like a tip from a kind universe. Word got around that I could help with zippers. Zippers are like shy dogs. If you yank, they panic, but if you ease the teeth into place, they remember how to behave. A jogger brought a windbreaker that had locked itself just below the collar. I dabbed a little dish soap on a cotton swab and worked it along the track, then coaxed the pull with slow patience. It slipped free with the quiet courage of a secret. The jogger grinned, zipped up, and ran off like a movie scene that didn't need music. My favorite visitors were the ones who stayed to talk while I worked. A city bus driver leaned on the table and told me about the night route, how the bus turns into a soft room where strangers keep each other company in silence. He carried a small lamp with a frayed cord. I snipped the old plug and attached a new one, wrapping the wires like braids. He told me he kept the lamp by a plant he'd had for 10 years, a rubber plant named Edgar. I told him I once had a plant that refused to die even when I tried to give it to a friend who forgot to water it. We laugh the way you laugh when two small truths shake hands. Around 4, the retired music teacher returned with a paper envelope full of tapes. He wanted to thank me. He placed one tape on the table and tapped it with a careful finger. "This one is from 1998, he said. "It's the first melody I wrote in Austin." He asked if he could play it. I nodded, and he set the cassette into the player like a coin in a wishing well. The sound was imperfect and perfect at once. That soft hiss, then a piano line that walked down the street and turned the corner and came back with a flower. The taqueria line paused. Even the alley listened. For 2 minutes, my repair table became a small stage, and the air felt gentle, as if it were holding us up. Not everything was art. A cyclist in full gear coasted up with a wobbly rear reflector. He was in a hurry. I tightened the bracket and sent him off in 30 seconds. He pointed at my sign. "You should put a tip jar," he said, and sprinted away like a punctuation mark. I didn't put a tip jar. What I wanted more than money was to keep the mood. I liked how people bent toward the table, like they were leaning over a pool to watch minnows. It wasn't just about fixing. It was about the small, shared silence when a thing comes back to life and everyone understands something at the same time. In the late afternoon, a little crisis arrived in a shoebox. It was a pink, heart-shaped music box with a ballerina that should twirl when the lid opens. The hinges were fine, but the gear had slipped. A girl with serious eyes stood by while her dad explained that the music box had been her mom's. The girl's face did not move, but her hands stayed flat on the table, as if she were keeping the day from sliding away. I breathed slow and opened the back. The spring was tense, ready to unspool in a messy sprint. I loosened it with the tip of my screwdriver and nudged the gear into its track. Bit by bit, it settled. When I closed the back and lifted the lid, the ballerina turned, slow at first, then steady. The music sounded like a small room where time is softer. The girl's eyes filled, but she blinked quickly, which is another language I respect. Her dad cleared his throat and said the simplest thank you I heard all day. They walked away carefully, like they were carrying a candle. As the shadows lengthened, the shop owners started closing their doors with that end-of-day sigh. I looked at my table, which had become an organized mess, and told myself I would stop after the next item. That's when an older man in a red cap approached. I knew the cap before I knew him. It was Mr. Alvarez. He had a slow wave, a kind smile, and a plastic bag with a label maker inside. "It won't cut the tape clean," he said, "and I miss neat edges." We sat together, and he told me he'd moved out to Pflugerville after the rent hike. He missed the block, but came by for groceries and the old ghosts. I opened the label maker and found the blade sticky with old adhesive. I soaked a cotton swab in rubbing alcohol and wiped it until it shined. We tested a strip, click, hum, slice. A clean edge. He tapped the counter of my card table, just like he used to pat his own, and said, "Always with the blade first. People forget the blade." He left me the label maker as a gift. "For your shop," he said, as if naming a newborn. I slept that night with my window open. The cicadas buzzed like a distant crowd at a game. My hands felt tired in a good way, like a dog after a long run. I thought about the box from the alley and the tag that said community shop. I thought about the tapes and the nap fan and the music box ballerina who relearned how to dance. I made a plan I didn't say out loud. The plan sounded like a drawer sliding into place. It sounded like maybe tomorrow could be a little better because today had been made with careful hands. The next morning I built a better table. I used 2 planks from the hardware store and a pair of folding sawhorses and told myself that sturdiness is a kind of kindness. I printed a small sign on the label maker Mr. Alvarez left me, "Open when I am here." It was honest and flexible, which is how I want to live. I set out a shallow tray for tiny parts and drew squares on a sheet of cardboard to park each repair like cars. By 9, the air already carried a warning from the sun, but the shade from the crepe myrtle kept me cool enough to think slowly. The neighborhood noticed. A mail carrier waved with 2 fingers while steering her cart. The bus driver from yesterday honked a friendly beep beep. I decided to add one more line to my sign. Leave a story if I help. People started doing it without hesitation. A high school kid wrote about passing his driving test. A hairstylist wrote about her grandmother's garden in San Antonio and the trick for coaxing stubborn tomatoes. A cook wrote about the first time he nailed the perfect char on a tortilla and how he nearly cried from the simple, smoky joy. I stuck the notes to the edge of the table with blue tape until the wind tried to read them all at once. Then I started a notebook and laid it open like a guest book at a wedding for ordinary days. Around noon, a small storm moved across the block. Not a weather storm, a planning storm. 3 neighbors arrived together. Jess from the coffee shop, the retired music teacher, and the florist who liked to put a daisy behind my ear. They had an idea to hold a tiny fix-it block party on Friday evening, a short event with lemonade, a little music, and my table in the middle. The idea made me feel like my bones were instruments. I said yes before they finished talking. We set a time, 5:30. We agreed to keep it simple. Simple keeps the door open, the teacher said, and I wrote that sentence down because sometimes you need to see a sentence to believe it. For the next 2 days, the table turned into a rhythm. Mornings were quiet repairs. Eyeglasses, a squeaky drawer pull, a bicycle bell that had swallowed some dust. Afternoons brought the longer puzzles. A lawn chair with a loose crossbar, a blender base that wanted to dance across the counter when it ran. I learned to say, "Let me try," which is a kind sentence, and "this needs a part one don't have," which is a true sentence. People were fine with both. A teenage boy came by with a camera that used film. The back would not latch. We found a missing tab and made a tiny hinge from a paper clip. He loaded black and white film with the care of a surgeon and took my picture. "For the zine," he said, and the word zine warmed my heart like a small lamp. Friday morning arrived with the soft pressure of a promise. I swept the sidewalk. I wrapped twine around the table legs because it made me feel prepared. At noon, the bus driver returned with a gift, a ceramic pot for tools, glazed a calm blue. "From Edgar and me," he said, meaning his rubber plant, and I put screwdrivers in the pot with a joy that felt tidy. I labeled drawers, clips, pins, springs, weird. Weird filled up fast. I used the label maker again just to hear the clean slice that Mr. Alvarez cared about. At 5, people began to gather with that easy drift you only see in neighborhoods that have decided to trust themselves. The florist strung a line of paper flags from the bike rack to a mailbox, and the wind lifted them like small hands waving. The music teacher brought a keyboard and set the volume low, so the sound felt like a carpet. Jess placed a cooler of lemonade near my table with a note, "Pay with a smile." Someone chalked hopscotch on the sidewalk. A toddler stumbled through the boxes and laughed from the belly, which is the best way to rehearse for the future. I started working before I realized we had started. A man with a guitar case needed a new strap button. A woman with a folding stroller asked if the latch could be less stubborn. A neighbor I'd only nodded to in the past handed me his key fob. The tiny screw held a coin cell battery that was fading like an old TV. He'd brought a battery from the hardware store. We replaced it together, and the car beeped from across the street like it had agreed to be part of the party. I saw faces I knew by their shoes and dogs and bikes, and then I knew them by their names. The cassette player made another appearance. The teacher brought it like a friend. He said he wanted to play one more tape. This one was titled Myrtle in black ink. When he pressed play, the melody moved like shade in the late day, careful and generous. People quieted. Even the dogs seemed to lower their shoulders. A breeze came through the alley and ruffled the paper flags just enough. No phones were out. The song ended without applause. Some moments don't need claps. They just need to be recognized and folded into the notebook of the mind. I thought the climax of the evening would be the music, but it turned out to be a pair of hinges. The pink heart-shaped music box had slipped again. The metal tab I bent on Wednesday had relaxed. The girl with serious eyes stood straighter now. She wore a t-shirt that said Austin Public Library and held the box like a small mission. We opened the back together. I showed her how the springs sat, how the gear teeth should kiss, not bite. I tightened the tab and added a speck of clear nail polish to keep it in place. Then I turned the key 3 times and handed the honor to her. She lifted the lid. The ballerina turned as if nothing had ever been broken. The girl smiled in a way that undid my week and redid it in the same breath. Her dad wiped his face with the back of his hand and said, "We're okay," to the air, and I believed him. When the sky went purple, someone flicked on the barber shop's string lights, and the block changed into a new room. We took a photo, all of us, not a posed one, just a picture someone caught when we were naturally arranged by the shape of the evening. You could see the table, the label maker, the blue pot of screwdrivers, the bandana around the cassette player, the paper flags, the daisy in a jar. I knew that if you looked closely, you could also see the old tag from the alley box. Community shop. Do not throw away. No one had thrown it away. We had turned it into a sentence we were living. After the party thinned and the coolers were drained and the chalk hopscotch had faded under good shoes, I sat on the step in front of my apartment and listened to the crickets start their night shift. My hands were nicked in two places. My back had that fine ache that promises sleep. I felt clear in a way I hadn't felt in a long time, like the inside of my head had been dusted with a soft brush. I labeled one last drawer in the blue pot. Thank While US. It didn't hold anything you could touch. It held a shape I could feel. Faces leaning in, stories written in big block letters, the clean snip of a neat edge. I looked down the alley toward the dark, where another day waited to be fixed into place. I stood, stretched, and carried my table inside, steady as a man walking a quiet, well-lit street toward home.